Season 11, The Fractured Dawn. Chapter 1, The Echoes of Magic. The winds of change had settled across the land. Once, the skies had been painted with the vibrant colors of magic, rippling with the energy that flowed like veins beneath the earth's surface, pulsing through the veins of every living being. Now, the air felt heavy, still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Celine stood at the edge of the city's highest tower, her eyes scanning the horizon as the sun dipped below the mountains in the distance. The city, once bustling with magic-infused energy, now felt quiet, unnervingly so. The streets below, filled with people trying to adjust to a life without the arcane, seemed strangely hollow. What was once a symbol of thriving civilization now appeared like a monument to a lost era. She'd never imagined leading a world like this, where magic was no more than a fleeting memory. After the cataclysmic fall of the void, the lands were left in ruins, yet no one truly knew what to do next. Magic was gone, vanished with the death of the void, but so much of the world's identity had been woven into that power. How did you rebuild a civilization when the very force that had defined it was no longer there to guide or protect them? Celine ran a hand through her hair, feeling the weight of the crown on her brow. It wasn't made of gold or jewels. It was a simple circlet, forged from the remnants of the broken world. A symbol, yes, but also a reminder that the task before her was monumental. "Your Excellency," a voice called, interrupting her thoughts. She turned to see Leora, her closest advisor and trusted confidant, stepping into the room. The woman's expression was a careful mask, but Celine could see the concern in her eyes. "Yes?" Celine asked, her voice soft but carrying the weight of the title she had inherited, whether she wanted it or not. "A delegation from the Eastern Coalition has arrived," Leora reported. "They've requested a private audience." Celine nodded, taking a slow breath. "Of course. Bring them in." Leora hesitated, her brow furrowing. "There's something else." Celine raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "There are rumors, strange occurrences in the Western Territories. It's been growing for weeks, but we haven't had enough reports to verify them yet." "Rumors? What kind of rumors?" "Unexplained phenomena. People claiming to hear voices in the air, like whispers on the wind. Some speak of things, moving on their own. It's subtle, but there's talk of disturbances in the old places, sites of magic. It's as if something is trying to resurface." Celine felt a chill run down her spine. The void was gone, obliterated in the final sacrifice of Darius. But something, some residue, lingered. Magic was supposed to be gone. It had to be. But what if that wasn't true? "Gather all the reports," she said, a firmness in her voice she hadn't felt in weeks. "I want to see everything. If there's even a whisper of something beyond our understanding, we need to know." Leora gave a slight nod and left the room, leaving Celine to ponder the implications of these strange occurrences. Magic was gone, but if there was one thing Celine knew from her years of fighting a rebellion, it was that nothing ever truly disappeared, especially not magic. The world had already changed. She'd seen it, felt it, in every step she took. The loss of magic had been like the loss of breath in the lungs of the world. And yet, as much as the world was quieter now, it felt like something was stirring beneath the surface. The void had left a scar, yes, but what if that scar was a gateway to something new? Something that had been waiting in the silence? That night, Celine lay awake in her chambers, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't sleep. The world seemed to hum with an unsettling energy, though she couldn't place it. She'd seen the signs, felt the shifts, but she couldn't explain it. The world had moved on, but her instincts, honed by years of battle, told her that something was still out there, biding its time. As the moon rose high above the city, Celine closed her eyes. The whispers of magic that had once surrounded her, comforting and powerful, were gone, but the echoes remained. Somewhere in the shadow of what had been, something was waiting. She had no idea what it was yet, but Celine would find out. Chapter 2, The Silent Rebellion. The city's streets were quieter now, as if the people had learned to keep their voices low, uncertain of how to navigate a world that no longer held magic. But for Celine, the silence was more deafening than any battle cry she had ever heard. It had been a month since the delegation from the Eastern Coalition had arrived, and they had not been the only ones knocking on her door. Every faction, every settlement, had a hand outstretched, either seeking favors or attempting to exploit the fragile peace. While some had offered their allegiance, others were far more reluctant, eyeing her leadership with suspicion. The absence of magic left them adrift, and that kind of uncertainty often bred discontent. But it wasn't just the diplomacy that weighed on her mind. It was the murmurs, the whispers of rebellion growing louder in the shadows. A new movement had taken root in the corners of the world, a rebellion that did not scream from the rooftops like those she had once fought. No, this was something quieter. They operated in the background, in the places where the cracks in society were easiest to exploit. Celine had heard the rumors. A leader, a woman named Vega, who spoke of restoring the world to its former glory, of bringing back the magic that had been lost. There were scattered reports, nothing concrete, but whispers from spies who had seen symbols of the rebellion in the underbelly of the cities, in the black markets, and in the remnants of old arcane temples. It was this quiet rebellion that Celine feared most, not the loud, obvious uprisings of old, but this new force, unseen and insidious. They believed, like many others, that the world could not survive without magic, that the peace Celine was trying to build was nothing more than an illusion, a weak compromise unworthy of the sacrifices made. Celine sat in the war room, surrounded by the map of the world that had once been divided by borders drawn in magic and blood. Now, those lines were meaningless. The world was fractured in more ways than one. The board was different, less tangible, more uncertain, but the stakes were just as high. Leora stood across from her, as always the voice of reason. The Eastern Coalition is still pressing for more resources. They want access to the mines in the Southern Highlands for their own projects. They claim the mines contain untapped materials that could help rebuild the world's infrastructure. And the tide born? Celine asked, her fingers drumming lightly on the table. The ocean's tides had long been a part of the world's magic, and now that the sea itself had been emptied of magic, the tide-born sought to regain their place in this new order. They are gathering strength, Leora replied. Corin is said to be planning an expedition to the deep-sea ruins. We may have to confront them soon, if they are serious about reawakening the old power beneath the waves. Celine frowned. And the rebellion? Leora's gaze flickered with a trace of worry, though she masked it well. We found evidence of their presence in the border towns. Disguised messages, covert meetings. They are organizing, but it's difficult to pinpoint who exactly is behind it. But there's one thing we know for sure. Vega is the leader. Celine paused. The name felt like a weight in her chest. Vega had once been a trusted ally of Darius, fighting side by side in the final push against the Void. How had it come to this? To the point where she would turn against the peace they had fought so hard to establish? Do we know where she is? Celine asked, her voice betraying none of the concern she felt. Not yet, Leora said, but her influence is growing. We've intercepted messages, calls for more recruits. They're using the promise of restoring magic to rally support. Some say she has even found a way to tap into the residual magic that still lingers in the world. Residual magic? Celine repeated softly, her mind whirling. There had been traces of magic left after the Void's destruction, cracks in reality, subtle disturbances in the air. Some claimed they were nothing more than the aftershocks of the Void's death, while others, like Vega, saw them as a new source of power. Are you suggesting Vega could be trying to harness the remnants of magic? Celine asked, suddenly alert. Leora nodded. Yes, it's risky and unstable, but we believe that's why she's staying in the shadows. No one has seen her directly, but the pieces are beginning to fall into place. She could be trying to rebuild what was lost, but at what cost? That evening, Celine took a walk through the city's outer ring, where the walls were still cracked from the final battle against the Void's forces. The rubble was slowly being cleared away, but the scars of that fight remained, both in the landscape and the hearts of the people. She passed through crowded market squares and silent streets alike, her thoughts heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. As she wandered deeper into the city's underbelly, she caught sight of something unusual, an old shop, barely noticeable among the dilapidated buildings. with a flicker of light coming from within. The door creaked as she stepped inside, the faintest hum of energy lingering in the air. Inside, she found a dark-haired woman. Her back turned to Celine as she pored over ancient scrolls spread across a table. She was muttering to herself, her voice barely audible. "Who are you?" Celine asked, her voice sharp. The woman froze, then slowly turned, revealing eyes that glowed faintly with an unnatural light. Her expression was calm, almost bored. "I wonder how long it would take for you to find me." "Vega." Celine's hand instinctively moved to the hilt of her blade. She had been ready for a confrontation, but not like this, not with the person who had once stood at her side. "Vega," Celine said, her voice tight with emotion. "What are you doing here?" Vega's lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm doing what I must to bring the world back to its rightful place. You may have won the war, Celine, but the peace you're trying to build is an illusion. The world cannot live without magic. You know that as well as I do." Celine's heart clenched. "You're wrong. The void is gone. Magic is gone. This world has to move forward." "No!" Vega snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. "This world cannot survive without it, and I'm going to make sure it doesn't have to." She motioned toward the scrolls on the table, ancient writings that spoke of rituals long abandoned. "You're right. The void is gone. But there are other ways to bring back what we lost, if we're willing to pay the price." Celine took a step back, her mind racing. The rebellion had begun, but this was no ordinary uprising. Vega wasn't seeking to destroy the world. She was seeking to reshape it. And Celine couldn't help but wonder if she was too late to stop it. Chapter 3. The Hollow Throne. The sound of footsteps echoed to the palace halls, each one a reminder of the solitude Celine had grown accustomed to. The grand structure that had once been filled with a hum of power, with the heated debates of the council and the bustling of servants, now stood empty in places. Too quiet, too still. The heavy silence was a constant companion to her thoughts, a reflection of the world outside that seemed more fractured by the day. It had been days since her meeting with Vega, and while she had hoped the encounter would provide clarity, it had only deepened the uncertainty gnawing at her. The rebellion's motives were still unclear, but one thing was becoming painfully obvious. Vega had found a way to tap into something that had been forgotten, something that, if not stopped, could unravel the fragile piece Celine was trying to hold together. But there was more to the story than just magic. Her mind drifted back to the council meeting earlier that day, where faction leaders from every corner of the world had gathered. The Eastern Coalition, the Tideborn, the remnants of the Wardens, all of them vying for control, power, and influence in this new world order. The air had been thick with tension as they argued over everything from resources to territory. But there was a deeper problem that none of them would speak of, not openly. A question that no one dared ask, but one Celine knew haunted them all. What came after the void? "You're quiet tonight, my queen." Leora's voice broke through the silence, soft and respectful as she stepped into Celine's chambers. "Is everything all right?" Celine looked up from the window where she had been staring out into the darkened sky. The stars had never seemed so far away. "I'm not sure," she admitted, standing to face her advisor. "This new order, it feels hollow. The throne I sit on is empty. I hold power, but there is no magic to wield, no clear path forward. And now there's a rebellion." Leora's face was a careful mask, but Celine could see the worry in her eyes. "You're carrying a heavy burden. No one expects you to have all the answers, not in a world so broken." "I didn't ask for this," Celine said, her voice suddenly bitter, though she quickly masked it. "I didn't ask to be the steward of a world without purpose." The words hung in the air like an unspoken curse. Without magic, without the void to fear, what were they fighting for? What did they have left? "You were chosen," Leora said, stepping closer. "And though the world is fractured, you have the strength to heal it. We all believe in you, Celine." "But what if the world doesn't want to be healed?" Celine whispered, her gaze shifting to the floor. Leora's silence was heavy with understanding. She could see what Celine was afraid of, that the peace they had fought for might not be enough to sustain the world in its new form, that, despite their best efforts, the people of the world would fall back into old patterns, driven by fear and greed, by the things that made them human. And perhaps that was the very thing that made magic impossible to restore. The next morning, Celine's fears were realized. The delegation from the Wardens had arrived unannounced, a bold gesture that both challenged and tested her leadership. The Wardens, an ancient order of warriors once thought to be lost to history, were known for their dedication to preserving the balance of the world. But what balance did they seek now, when there was no magic to preserve? The leader of the Wardens, a grizzled man named Kalen, stood in front of her with a posture as rigid as the ancient oaths they had sworn to uphold. "You failed!" Kalen's voice was a low growl, his eyes narrowing in a way that spoke more disappointment than accusation. "The void's death has left the world unmoored. The very foundations of reality itself have been shaken. The rifts you speak of, they are but the beginning." Celine took a steadying breath, refusing to let the words hit her as they had been intended. "I am aware of the rifts, Kalen. We are working on solutions." "Solutions?" He spat the word, his disdain palpable. "There is no solution without the abyssal core." Celine's pulse quickened at the mention of the abyssal core. It was a legend, a mythical artifact believed to have the power to heal or destroy the world. The Wardens had long sought it, but its existence had been shrouded in mystery. If Kalen believed it was a key to stopping the rifts, then the stakes had just risen considerably. "You seek the abyssal core?" Celine asked, her voice steady despite the growing tension in her chest. "And what makes you think you have the right to control it?" Kalen's eyes hardened. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Celine. Without the void, without its power to anchor reality, the world will collapse into chaos. The abyssal core is the only way to restore balance." "And what do you propose?" Celine asked, though she already had a sinking feeling in her gut. Kalen's gaze turned cold. "Give us control of the abyssal core, and we will ensure the rifts are sealed. We will bring the world back into harmony. If you refuse, well, we'll do what we must, and you'll stand by and watch the world fall apart. Is that the future you want?" The threat was clear, but the truth in Kalen's words gnawed at Celine's mind. The Wardens were not wrong about the danger the rifts posed, but could they truly be trusted with something as powerful as the abyssal core? Could anyone? Later that day, Celine stood alone in the palace courtyard, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The sky was tinged with red as the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the land. She had seen many battles in her life, had led her people through war, through fire, through the heart of the void. But this was something different. The battle for the future of the world was not one that could be won with swords and shields. It was a battle of belief, of trust, and what the world was willing to become in the absence of the very power that had once shaped it. The decision loomed over her like a storm on the horizon. Would she trust the Wardens with the abyssal core? Would she place her faith in them, or would she stand against them, risking the wrath of an ancient order whose influence was only now starting to resurface? The throne she sat on was not one of stone or gold. It was a throne of decisions, each one heavy with consequence. And Celine had to decide which future she would fight for. Chapter 4. The Rising Tide. The sound of waves crashing against the jagged rocks below the cliffs was a constant reminder of the world's unyielding, ever-present power. Celine stood at the edge of the palace balcony, her eyes scanning the horizon where the ocean met the sky. The sea had always been a mysterious force, both a source of life and a symbol of something far older than any of them. Since the void's death, the tides had become unervingly still. Magic had once flowed through the oceans, as it had in every part of the world. But now, there was only silence beneath the surface. That silence, however, was beginning to change. News of the Tideborn, a faction that had emerged from the deep waters, had reached her ears in recent weeks. But it wasn't until a messenger arrived that she fully understood the magnitude of their presence. A delegation from the Tideborn had requested an audience, and their leader, a figure named Corin, was said to possess knowledge that could reshape the balance of power. He claimed to have access to ancient secrets of the sea, secrets that could restore the world's lost equilibrium or perhaps tip it into deeper chaos. Celine's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. Leora appeared, her face somber. "The Tideborn are ready to meet with you, my queen," she said, bowing her head slightly. Celine nodded. her gaze lingering on the dark waters stretching into the distance. I've heard enough rumors to know this won't be a simple meeting. Leora's eyes flickered with caution. No, my queen, Corin is not like the others. He is enigmatic, even among his own people. Some say he has visions of the world before the void, that he knows things about the oceans that no one else does. And what do we know about him? Celine asked, turning toward her advisor. Leora hesitated before answering. He speaks of restoring balance, but from the little information we have, it seems that his definition of balance may be skewed. The Thai-born believe that the oceans hold the key to restoring magic. Not just magic itself, but the forces that created it. They are fixated on the idea that only by tapping into the ocean's original power can the world truly heal. Celine's brow furrowed. And what would that mean for the rest of us? For the land dwellers? We don't know yet, Leora said. But if Corin is who they say he is, then he could be a powerful ally or a dangerous adversary. The meeting was held in the grand hall of the palace, a room built to accommodate the weight of decisions made by the world's leaders. The air was thick with anticipation as Celine entered, flanked by her trusted advisors. The Thai-born delegation was already gathered at the far end of the room. They stood in a semicircle, their figures lit by the flickering torches that lined the walls. But it was their presence that captured attention. They were otherworldly, tall, with pale skin that shimmered faintly like the surface of the sea at night, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Their long, flowing hair moved as though caught by an unseen current. At their center stood Corin. He was unlike anyone Celine had ever met. He wasn't simply a leader. He radiated an aura of power that seemed to stretch far beyond his physical form. His eyes, a piercing sea green, locked onto hers as she entered, and she felt the weight of his gaze, as though he was seeing through her. Queen Celine, Corin spoke, his voice deep, resonant, as if echoing the sound of waves crashing against a distant shore. It is an honor to finally meet the one who leads this broken world. Celine's hand rested lightly on the hilt of her sword, a habit she had never been able to shake, especially in the presence of such overwhelming power. You've come from the depths of the sea. Corin, what is it you seek? Corin's lips curled into a faint smile, though there was no warmth in it. What we seek is simple. Balance. The oceans are the source of all life, of all power. Without them, the world is incomplete. The absence of magic is but a symptom of a greater wound, one that can only be healed by restoring the seas to their true state. And how do you propose we do that? Celine asked, her voice cautious, though her curiosity was piqued. By reclaiming what was lost, Corin said. The oceans once held the power to shape the world. Before the void, before magic was corrupted, that power has slumbered beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to awaken. If we can tap into it, we can restore the world. We can make the oceans the wellspring of power again, and with it, we can heal the rifts, mend the fractures in time and space, and even, he paused, letting the weight of his words settle, bring back what was taken from us. Celine felt a shiver run through her. What was taken from us? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The true magic, Corin said softly, but there was a darkness in his tone, an implication that went unspoken but felt all too real. Before the void's destruction, the oceans were the foundation of everything, the life force of the world. The void's death shattered the balance, but also fractured the ocean's power. We wish to restore that balance, to reclaim the oceans and make them whole again. Celine narrowed her eyes. And what price will the world pay for this restoration? Because nothing comes without cost. You can't simply tap into a power as ancient as the oceans without consequences. Corin's eyes glimmered. Perhaps the cost will be high, he said, but the world cannot survive without it. You must understand, Queen Celine, that what we offer is not just a return to the past. It is a chance to transcend it. The oceans have always been a key to life and death, to creation and destruction. Only by harnessing their power can we restore the balance that was lost. Later that evening, Celine stood alone in the palace courtyard, her mind spinning with the implications of Corin's words. Could the oceans truly hold the key to restoring magic? And if they could, was it worth the price Corin implied? The Thai-born seemed as enigmatic and dangerous as they were powerful. The promise of restoration was tempting. But Celine knew better than to trust in promises alone. There was something beneath the surface of Corin's words, something darker that he was not saying. Leora approached quietly, her voice low. "Do you believe in my queen?" "I don't know," Celine admitted, "but I cannot ignore what he has said. If the oceans truly hold the power to restore balance, then we must consider what that means to the world. For everyone, magic may be gone, but there are still forces at work, ancient and powerful forces that none of us fully understand." Leora glanced toward the ocean, her expression unreadable. What if Corin has other plans? What if he seeks not just to restore balance, but to control it? "I think," Celine said, her eyes narrowing as she stared out over the darkened waters, "we need to find out." Chapter 5. Shifting Realities. The rifts had grown more violent. No longer mere cracks in the fabric of reality. They were now deep chasms, tearing through the earth and the very nature of existence itself. The once stable boundaries of the material world were becoming thin, as if reality were a delicate cloth being pulled too tightly in multiple directions. It had become clear to Celine that what had begun as small disturbances were now symptoms of something much larger and far more dangerous. Her nights had become plagued with dreams of other worlds, fractured landscapes, where time unraveled like loose threads and the sky shimmered with colors that shouldn't have existed. She would wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding, only to find herself in a world that felt just as unstable as the one she had left behind in her nightmares. In the palace, Celine's mind had begun to fracture as well. Her advisors, her council, had become preoccupied with maintaining control of the fractured factions of the world. But each new discovery about the rifts only added to her growing sense of helplessness. They were too vast to ignore, too erratic to predict, and worst of all, no one had any idea how to stop them. Leora had suggested that they consult the wardens, those ancient warriors who had resurfaced with dire warnings. It was they would claim the rifts were an inevitable consequence of the void's destruction, the final cracks in the barrier between worlds. The wardens insisted that only by confronting the abyssal core could they begin to understand and potentially mend the breach between dimensions. But there was more to the story than even the wardens had revealed. Celine had begun to wonder. Could the rift be tied to something more insidious than the death of magic? Were they symptoms of a deeper fracture within the very fabric of existence? Something that could not simply be healed with power or force. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, sharp knock on the door. "Come in," Celine called, turning her attention away from the window, where the distant rift's light pulsed ominously like a heartbeat. Leora entered quickly, her face tight with concern. "My queen, it's happening again. A new rift has appeared just outside the city." Celine's pulse quickened. "How bad is it?" "It's worse than before," Leora said, her voice low. "This one's different. It's growing faster, almost as if it's trying to pull the world into it. The rift's energies are overwhelming. Our mages can't approach it without losing themselves to its pull." Celine's heart sank. "Where is it located?" "Near the old ruins," Leora answered, "where the wardens believe the abyssal core lies." Celine took a breath. "We're going. Prepare the expedition. We leave immediately." The journey to the ruins was a tense one, every member of the expedition acutely aware of the growing danger. The land around them had begun to shift unnaturally. Trees bent in strange directions, as though they had grown in response to the pull of the rifts. The air itself seemed to crackle with static, and the ground hummed as though alive beneath their feet. As they drew closer to the side of the rift, a deep, unsettling sense of vertigo pressed on their minds, as if the world were tilting at odd angles just beyond their perception. When they arrived, the sight was even worse than Celine had imagined. The rift was massive, towering, pulsing with an otherworldly glow that seemed to shift in color from deep purples to sickly greens. It was like a tear in the sky itself, fringed with jagged lines of pure energy that writhed and twisted as though the rift was alive. The air around it hummed and crackled, the sound like 1,000 whispers lost in the wind. Celine felt a cold shiver crawl down her spine. "We can't approach it," said Eric, one of the wardens, his voice low but firm. "Not unless we want to risk everything. The rift is growing faster than anything we've encountered." Leora stepped forward, eyes wide with fear. "We need to find a way to stabilize it." If we don't, we may not be the only ones to vanish into it. Celine finished for her, her voice grim. We need answers, and we need them now. The wardens had prepared for this moment. At least, they had prepared as much as anyone could, knowing that the rifts were growing uncontrollable. The plan was to deploy a special kind of energy device that had been developed in secret. It was meant to stabilize the rift for long enough to get a better understanding of its nature. But Celine knew it was a gamble. What's the chance this works? She asked, turning to Kalen, the leader of the wardens. He looked at the device they had brought with them, a complicated array of wires and crystal filaments, pulsing faintly with energy. 50-50, he said, with an uncharacteristic edge to his voice. Either it stabilizes the rift, or we might just make it worse. Celine stared at the device for a long moment. Then, without a word, she nodded. Do it. The world held its breath as the wardens activated the device. Energy crackled from the contraption, a low hum building in intensity until it was a deafening roar. The rift trembled, as though it were alive, trying to reject the intrusion. Celine's heart raced, and she felt the pull of the rift, the oppressive sensation of being on the verge of being torn apart. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the rift began to shrink, its energy flickering erratically before finally stabilizing. The air became still, the buzzing and crackling quieting into a strange, unnatural calm. We did it. Leora breathed, a note of relief in her voice. But Celine didn't feel relief. She felt something else. Something was wrong. The rift had closed, but it hadn't closed completely. There was a faint shimmer in the air, like a lingering trace of its energy, still vibrating. And in the distance, Celine saw something she could not explain. A figure standing just beyond the edge of the rift. A silhouette, dark and twisted, its outline distorted by the last remnants of the rift's energy. It stared at her. You saw that too, didn't you? Leora asked, her voice tight. I saw it, Celine said, her voice cold with realization. We've done something wrong. The rift isn't just a tear in reality. It's a doorway. A doorway to what? Leora whispered, stepping closer. Celine's gaze never left the figure, which seemed to be watching them from beyond the rift's fading light. I don't know, but I intend to find out. Chapter 6, The Fallen. The sound of armored footsteps echoed through the darkened halls of the ruined temple. Celine's breath was shallow as she walked alongside her trusted advisors. The faint, rhythmic thumping of their boots a stark contrast to the silence that surrounded them. The ancient structure, once a place of worship and reverence, had fallen into disrepair. Its stone walls covered in moss, the ceiling broken in places, exposing the blackened sky above. The air here was thick with the scent of decay, and the walls seemed to pulse with a presence that made the hairs on the back of Celine's neck stand on end. This place feels wrong, Leora whispered, her voice barely audible. Celine nodded but did not respond. Her mind was occupied with the rumors of the wardens, an ancient order once thought to be extinct, now returned to warn them of an impending catastrophe. For weeks, they had been tracking the movements of the rifts, the disturbances that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of their reality. But now, the wardens had something more to say, something darker. The leader of the wardens, Kalen, had summoned them to this forgotten temple, hidden deep in the heart of the Wormwood Forest, a place where the rifts were especially volatile. Here, they found something new, the remnants of a power that predated even the void. Where are they? Celine asked, her voice low as she gazed around the eerie ruins. They should be here soon, Kalen replied, his voice tinged with a strange unease. The wardens, stoic and resolute as ever, seemed on edge. It was unsettling to see their legendary composure falter. As they continued deeper into the temple, they reached a large, circular chamber. At its center was a massive, jagged stone altar, ancient symbols carved into its surface. Symbols that seemed to shift and pulse with an otherworldly energy, much like the rifts themselves. The walls of the chamber were covered in faded murals depicting warriors, not unlike the wardens themselves, engaged in battles against creatures from another realm. But it wasn't the murals that drew Celine's attention. It was a figure standing at the far side of the chamber, a man draped in tattered black robes, his face obscured by a hood. He stood motionless, his hands outstretched, palms upward, as though waiting for something or someone. "Celine!" Kalen's voice broke the silence, thick with reverence and caution. "This is Aradine. He is the last of the fallen." Celine's pulse quickened. "The fallen," she echoed, the name stirring something deep within her. "I've heard whispers, but I thought they were nothing more than legends." Kalen shook his head. "The fallen were once the elite of the Wardens, those who could control the abyssal magic, the dark power that lies beneath the surface of this world. They were the ones tasked with keeping the balance between realms. But something went wrong. A terrible tragedy. The Void's birth, the corruption of the old magic. It all led to their downfall." Aradine lifted his head, revealing his face, pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken and cold. His gaze met Celine's, and for a moment, she felt the weight of centuries of loss and betrayal. "It is good that you have come, Celine." Aradine spoke, his voice soft but carrying an unnatural resonance. It was not just his voice. It felt as though the very air itself was speaking. "You are the one who will decide whether the world shall be saved or damned." Celine frowned, stepping forward cautiously. "I don't understand. What is it you want from me? You've been silent for centuries, and now you suddenly appear, warning us of impending doom. What are the Wardens hiding from us?" Aradane's lips curled into a faint, sorrowful smile. "The Wardens are not hiding anything, my queen. They simply do not know the full truth. The rifts, they are not just cracks in reality. They are the bleeding wounds of something far darker, something that was locked away before the Void's rise. The destruction of the Void has freed it." Leora's eyes widened in alarm. "You mean this power, whatever it is, was sealed away? But why? What is it?" Aradane's gaze seemed to shift inward, as though he were recalling something long forgotten. "The Abyss, a realm beyond the rifts, where the primal forces of the world are contained. The Void, in its infinite hunger, sought to devour the boundaries that kept it at bay. When it destroyed itself, it tore through the barrier between worlds, leaving behind the rifts as its legacy. But the Abyss, it has not remained empty. Something ancient, something unspeakable, is beginning to stir within it. And if we do not act soon, the rifts will open fully, and the Abyss will flood the material world." Celine felt a chill settle in her bones. "But how do we stop it? You speak of the Abyss as though it is alive. What exactly is it?" "It is not just alive," Aradine replied, his voice growing darker. "The Abyss is a realm of primal energy, of chaos. Before the Void's rise, the Abyss was a prison, a place where the forces of creation and destruction were bound. It is not just a place. It is a living force that exists to consume and reshape reality. And now it is waking." Celine glanced at Kalen, her thoughts racing. "And the Wardens? You were tasked with guarding it." "We failed," Kalen admitted quietly. "We thought the rifts were merely the scars of the Void's death. We did not realize they were gateways to something far worse." Aradine stepped forward, his movement slow and deliberate. "The Abyss cannot be contained by mere power. It must be sealed by understanding, by a sacrifice that will sever the ties between worlds and stop its influence from spreading. There is an artifact, one known only to a few, the Abyssal Core. It is the only key to sealing the rifts, but it is also the only means of opening them fully. Only one who understands its power can control it." Celine's heart pounded in her chest. "Where is this artifact?" "It is hidden, far beneath the surface of the world, beneath the sea. The Tideborn know of it, but they have kept it secret for their own reasons," Aradine said. "To find the Abyssal Core, you must travel deeper than any have dared, to the heart of the world itself." The silence that followed was thick with the weight of Aradane's words. The implications of what he had said hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. Leora broke the silence, her voice sharp with fear. "If the Abyss awakens, what happens to us? To the world?" Aradane's eyes darkened. "The world will cease to be. The Abyss does not simply destroy. It remakes. And what it remakes is unrecognizable. You will witness the collapse of reality itself. Time, space, and matter will lose all meaning. The material world will become part of the Abyss, and all that will be left is darkness and chaos." Celine's hand clenched into a fist, her resolve hardening. Then we have no choice. We must find the abyssal core, and we must stop this before it's too late. Aradine gave her a long, searching look. You will not succeed by strength alone. You will need more than that. The rift is not just a doorway. It is a mirror. It reflects the darkest parts of the soul. To close it, you must confront what lies within you. Celine's heart tightened, but she stood tall, her voice firm. Then I will face whatever I must. The world cannot fall. Not again. Aradine bowed his head, a gesture of respect, or perhaps a warning. Then go, Queen Celine. But remember, there are those who walk the line between light and shadow, between life and death. The path you seek will not be easy. As Celine turned to leave the temple, her mind heavy with the weight of what lay ahead, she knew that the battle to save the world was just beginning. And it was not just the rift she had to worry about. It was the darkness within. Chapter 7. Beneath the Surface. The winds howled across the vast ocean as Celine stood at the edge of the cliff, gazing out into the endless expanse of water. It felt as if the sea itself were alive, whispering secrets of ancient times. Its deep blue waters shifting and swirling with a power far beyond what any of them truly understood. The Tide-born had been more elusive than she had expected. They had retreated into the ocean's depths, hiding secrets they weren't ready to share. Yet, Celine had no choice. The abyssal core was their key, and their knowledge might be the only thing standing between her world and total annihilation. The Tide-born had agreed, reluctantly, with much suspicion, that they would help, but only if Celine and her companions proved their worth. The Sea-born faction had a unique culture, bound not only to the ocean, but to ancient forces that had been dormant for millennia. Their leader, Corin, had told Celine that to find the abyssal core, they were to journey beneath the surface of the world, to a place known only as the Sunken Tombs. It's not just about finding the artifact. Corin had warned her earlier, his deep-set eyes narrowing as he spoke. The abyssal core is not simply an object. It is a force, a pulse that binds the rifts together. It has been waiting for centuries, hidden away in the dark. The very depths of the ocean are its prison, and if you disturb it, you may awaken something far worse than the rifts themselves. Celine's thoughts were interrupted by a quiet voice behind her. "We're ready, my queen." Leora stepped forward, a subtle tension in her posture. She had always been strong, but even now, as they prepared to descend into the heart of the ocean, Celine could sense the weight on her shoulders. The unknowns were mounting. What awaited them beneath the waves, how the Tide-born would react, and what the abyssal core would truly do if they found it. Celine nodded without turning. "Let's go." The Tide-born had fashioned a ship that could carry them into the depths, a massive vessel made of blackened, polished stone, woven with the remains of long-forgotten sea creatures. The ship was both eerie and beautiful, glowing faintly in the dim light of the twilight sky. Its sails, crafted from some kind of deep-sea fabric, shimmered with a bioluminescent glow, illuminating the path ahead. The water around them was dark, vast, and endless, just as it had always been. But now, with the knowledge of the rifts and the abyss looming, it felt far more menacing. Corin stood at the helm, his hand steady on the ship's wheel. His long, flowing hair moved like liquid silver, and his blue-green skin gleamed in the light of the bioluminescent sails. "The Sunken Tombs are below us," he said, his voice deep and calm. "But we must first pass to the Sea of Whispers. The waters there are treacherous, filled with currents that pull at the mind, not just the body. What are we likely to encounter in the Sea of Whispers?" Celine asked, her gaze sharp. Corin's expression darkened. The Sea of Whispers is not just a place. It is a curse. It is where the first rift opened, where the fabric of reality began to tear. The tide itself is haunted by the souls of those who tried to control the abyss long before your time. They are not alive, but neither are they dead. They will try to twist your mind, make you doubt yourself, to draw you into the depths and drown you in your own fears. It is dangerous. Leora, standing beside Celine, shot a quick glance at her, uncertainty in her eyes. "Do we have any defense against it?" Corin turned his eyes toward her. "We can shield your minds from most of its effects, but it is up to you to resist. Strength of will is your greatest weapon in these waters." Celine took a deep breath. The weight of her responsibility was ever present. But now, it was compounded by the looming uncertainty of what lay ahead. She didn't know if they were heading into a literal tomb, or if the sea of whispers would drown them before they even reached the sunken tombs. But there was no turning back. Not now. The ship cut through the dark waters, moving deeper into the sea. The deeper they traveled, the darker and colder it became. The stars above faded into nothingness, swallowed by the immensity of the ocean. Below them, the abyssal depths stretched into an uncharted void, a place where light did not reach. As the ship moved further, the whispers began. Soft at first, like the murmur of the ocean itself, the words seemed to come from everywhere. Voices, distant, mournful, as if calling from the very depths of time. Celine, Leora, Kaylin. The voices came in waves, riding the currents that tugged at their ship. Each whisper carried a sense of longing, regret, and something darker, something ancient. The further they went, the more the whispers became tangible, threading into their thoughts, their fears, and their insecurities. Leora flinched, her hand gripping the side of the ship. It's talking to me. It's telling me things I've done, things I regret. Celine placed a hand on Leora's shoulder, her voice steady. Stay with me. We're not alone in this. Whatever they say, it's just an echo. We are stronger than that. But even as she spoke, Celine could feel it too, the whispers tugging at her memories, reminding her of her past mistakes, her failures, the countless lives lost because of decisions she had made. She shook her head, trying to banish the thoughts, but they clung to her, pulling at her consciousness. Suddenly, a sharp cry broke through the mental haze. Kaylin's voice rang out, strained and filled with panic. Look out! Celine's head snapped up, her heart racing. The waters around them had begun to stir violently. The whispers turned into shrill screams as the sea roiled and churned, dark shapes emerging from the depths. Something was coming. The ship rocked violently as something enormous struck the hull, sending a shockwave of cold through the deck. The water around them rippled and twisted as monstrous shapes, like great serpents made of shadows, rose from the depths. Their eyes glowed faintly, piercing through the darkness. Hold tight, Corin shouted, his voice commanding and clear. The tide-borne moved quickly, their innate connection to the ocean allowing them to react with swift precision. They unfurled the ship's defensive sails, which shimmered with a radiant light, warding off the darkness as the massive sea serpents lunged toward them. Those are the ancient sentinels of the Sea of Whispers, Corin explained, his voice strained. Guardians of the rifts, protectors of the abyss. They will not let us pass without a fight. Celine's heart hammered in her chest as the ship swayed under the strain of the assault. The creatures were massive, fathomless, twisting horrors of shadow and water. The sea itself seemed to be fighting against them, the rifts pull evident in every lunge of the beasts. We need to move faster, Leora shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Corin nodded grimly, his focus unwavering. Brace yourselves. We're entering the tombs. The ship surged forward, propelled by the tide itself as the ancient serpents lashed out one last time before receding into the depths, their forms vanishing back into the black water, leaving nothing but a lingering chill. And then, ahead of them, through the darkness of the Sea of Whispers, a faint, eerie glow appeared, a glowing entrance, like the mouth of some ancient, forgotten creature. The sunken tombs. Celine's gaze hardened. They were close now, closer than ever. But the deeper they went, the more she could feel it. The abyss was calling, and what they would find beneath the surface might be more than just the artifact they sought. It might be the beginning of the end. Chapter 8. The Darkness Within. The walls of the sunken tombs loomed before them like a colossal mouth, a jagged and ruined structure carved into the very bedrock of the ocean floor. Dark, shifting shadows clung to the crumbling stones, as if the tomb itself were alive, breathing in time with the currents. The glow of bioluminescent algae bathed the ancient ruins in a sickly greenish light, casting twisted reflections on the water that flowed in slow, uneven currents. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to thicken, pressing in on them from all sides. Celine felt it in her bones, a deep, primal sense of wrongness, as though the tombs were not just a place, but a trap, a place built not to honor the dead, but to contain something far worse. The whispers had ceased, but the silence that followed felt worse than any sound. It was oppressive, suffocating. Corin stood at the front of the group, his eyes narrowing as they passed through an archway flanked by faded statues of long-forgotten gods. "We are close," he murmured, his voice grim. "The abyssal core lies at the heart of these ruins. But be warned, the tombs are more than just a burial ground. They are a seal, a prison." "Prison for what?" Leora asked, her tone sharp, but tinged with fear. Corin did not answer immediately. He glanced over his shoulder, his face drawn. The abyss was never meant to be freed. It is an ancient force, one that predates even the first rift. It has a will of its own, and it does not care who it destroys. Celine's throat tightened. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. They were about to face something that no one had truly understood. The forces that had shaped the world long before the void, long before magic itself. And if they were wrong, if they failed, what would be left of this world? How do we destroy it? Celine asked, her voice steady, but her thoughts racing. Or is there a way to control it? Corin paused, eyes distant. Control? The abyss cannot be controlled. Not by anyone. Not even by the Tideborn. The best we can do is seal it away. And even that is a gamble. The abyss does not tolerate containment. It always finds a way to break free. They moved deeper into the tombs, the air growing colder with each step. The deeper they ventured, the more the ancient carvings on the walls seemed to distort, shifting into grotesque forms. Beastly, nightmarish creatures whose eyes seemed to follow them with an unblinking gaze. Celine's mind whirled. She had always known that the rifts were dangerous, that they held some kind of power beyond her understanding. But she had not realized how truly ancient this power was. The abyss wasn't just a tear in the fabric of reality. It was a force that had existed since before time itself. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A low, rumbling sound reverberated through the walls, as if the tomb itself were awakening. The air grew thick with an unnatural chill. "Stay close," Corin said sharply. "This place is alive, and it's not happy we're here." Before Celine could respond, a shrill cry echoed through the tomb. It was a sound unlike any she had heard before, a tortured, rasping wail that seemed to come from all directions. The walls themselves seemed to vibrate in response, as though the very stone were screaming in agony. Leora gripped her sword tighter, her eyes wide with fear. What was that? Corin's face darkened, and his grip on his staff tightened. The tombs are not just a place of death. They are a place of rebirth. The abyss feeds on the energy of those who enter, and it twists them into its servants. Those who come here with doubt, fear, or greed are never the same. Suddenly, from the shadows ahead, figures emerged, twisted, malformed beings, their bodies a patchwork of human and sea creature, their eyes black pits of nothingness. They moved with unnatural grace, as though the very water around them had become part of their flesh. Celine's breath caught in her throat. These were not just the remnants of ancient warriors or long-dead kings. These were the manifestations of the abyss itself. The tomb had not only contained the artifact, it had been a breeding ground for the abyss's power, its very nature twisting and corrupting the souls of the lost. "We need to move faster," Celine said, her voice calm but urgent. She drew her sword, feeling its familiar weight in her hand. "We can't stay here." But as she moved forward, a force slammed into her mind, a dark, cold presence, slithering into her thoughts, twisting them. She staggered, the blade of her sword faltering in her hand as memories began to flood her mind, memories she had long buried. Visions flashed before her eyes, scenes of destruction, of lives lost, of mistakes she could never undo, faces of the fallen, of those who had fought and died for a world that had now turned its back on them. Darius, the rebellion, the void, the countless choices she had made that had led her to this moment. "You failed them," a voice whispered. "You could have done more. You could have saved them all." She shook her head, tried to shake off the suffocating weight of the thoughts pressing in on her. The abyss was not just an external force. It was feeding on her doubts, her guilt, her fear. It was attacking her from within, seeking to break her resolve. "Celine!" Leora shouted, her voice pulling her back to reality. "Snap out of it." Celine gritted her teeth, fighting to regain control. She had faced down the void. She had fought against the forces of chaos. She would not succumb now, not to the darkness within. "Stay focused," she said through gritted teeth, her sword steady once more. "We need to get to the abyssal core. That's the only way to stop this." Corin's voice was grave. "Be warned, Queen Selene. The deeper you go, the more the abyss will test you. It will offer you what you desire most: power, answers, peace. But these are lies. All of it is a lie. If you take the bait, you will lose yourself." Selene nodded, forcing the dark whispers to fade into the recesses of her mind. She could not afford to be distracted, not now. The tomb ahead grew darker, the oppressive atmosphere growing stronger with each step. The walls seemed to close in, and the very ground beneath their feet shifted, as if the tomb itself were shifting to trap them. Finally, they reached a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow, its walls covered in swirling black carvings. At the center of the chamber stood a massive pedestal, atop which rested the abyssal core, a jagged, pulsating crystal, its dark veins of energy pulsing with a sinister light. But as Selene stepped forward, the ground beneath her feet cracked open with a deafening roar. From the cracks, massive tendrils of black energy shot out, swirling like serpents in the air. The abyss had already begun to fight back. "Get the core!" Corin yelled. "We have no time." Selene pushed forward, her hand outstretched. The dark tendrils lashed at her, trying to pull her into the abyss, but she gritted her teeth and summoned every ounce of willpower she had left. She could feel the abyss gnawing at the edges of her mind, but she would not falter. Her fingers brushed the cold surface of the abyssal core. Chapter 9. The Power of the Abyss. The moment Selene's fingers touched the abyssal core, the world seemed to shudder. The entire chamber rattled, and the air thickened with a heavy, pulsating energy. The tendrils of darkness that had been lashing out at her recoiled, then snapped forward with force that knocked her to the ground. She barely had time to brace herself before the entire room was flooded with a blinding light, white and sharp, burning through the darkness like a spear. The core was no longer just a crystal. It was alive. In that instant, Selene could feel it, a flood of memories not her own, rushing into her mind. Ancient wars, kingdoms lost to time, the birth of the rifts, and at the heart of it all, the abyss, the true force that had shaped the void and everything that had followed. The abyss wasn't just a tear in reality. It was an entity, a being of unimaginable power that had been waiting, hidden beneath the world for eons, feeding on the decay of forgotten empires, manipulating history from the shadows. Its reach was beyond comprehension, stretching across time and space, a force both destructive and creative, both terrible and beautiful. For a moment, she couldn't tell where she ended and the abyss began. The line between them blurred, her mind fraying at the edges. Selene, the voice was familiar, but not hers. It echoed through her thoughts like a whisper in a dream. Her heart skipped a beat as the voice grew louder. "You are the key. You always have been. This world was never meant to survive without me." It was Riven. His voice, distorted and hollow, reverberated through her mind, a vile echo of everything she had fought to keep at bay. The abyss was using his image, his voice, to reach her, to manipulate her. But it was not Riven speaking. It was the abyss, disguising itself in the image of the man who had once been her ally. She gritted her teeth, pulling herself to her feet. "No," she muttered, her voice barely audible over the din. "I won't let you use him against me." "But you already have," the voice purred. "Your entire life has been shaped by the choices you made, Selene. You sought power, sought control, but it was never yours to wield. The void was just the beginning. You need me to save this world. You cannot stop the rifts. Not without me." The core's pulsing light intensified, and the walls of the tomb seemed to cave inward, the very ground beneath her shaking violently, as if the abyss itself were stretching its tendrils out into material plane. The others were struggling to stay upright, caught in the same swirling maelstrom of energy. Leora and Kalen, their faces grim with determination, fought against the pressure that threatened to crush them, while Corin stood at the center of the chaos, chanting in a language Selene didn't understand, attempting to hold back the flood of energy that surged from the core. "We need to get out." Leora shouted over the growing noise. "It's too much. The core is ripping the tomb apart." Celine's head swam. She could feel the abyss inside her, its cold, endless hunger pressing against her mind, urging her to succumb to it. The power it promised was too great. She could hear it, feel it. The temptation to seize the power, to bend reality to her will, to fix everything that had gone wrong. She could restore the void. She could restore magic. She could... Celine. Corin's voice cut through the fog of temptation. Do not listen to it. It will consume you. The abyss is not meant to be controlled. It is not your ally. He was right. She had to fight it. The abyss was not a solution. It was a curse. She had seen what it had done to Riven. She had seen what it had done to the world. If she allowed it to take hold of her, there would be no coming back. But the abyss whispered still. Power. Control. Unity. The voices grew louder, drowning out her thoughts, drowning out the warnings. Celine's hands shook, the overwhelming energy of the abyss pressing into her mind like a vice. Her sword, still in her grasp, was humming with energy, as though it too was resonating with the power of the abyss. You are not strong enough, it taunted. You cannot fight this alone. A vision flashed before her eyes. Her people, her world, tore apart by the rifts, by the loss of magic. But now, she saw the path that could be. A world reborn, one where she held the power to reshape reality, to heal the rifts, to restore the balance. Take it, the voice hissed. Take what you deserve. The choice loomed before her, clearer than ever before. She could seize the power of the abyss, wield it, and shape the world to her will. She could fix the world, make it whole again. She could defeat the rifts, bring magic back, heal the wounds of the past. But at what cost? It's a lie. Celine thought, clinging to the last shreds of her will. It's always been a lie. The abyss doesn't want to fix the world. It wants to break it. With a scream of effort, Celine shoved the vision aside, forcing herself to focus on the reality around her. The core pulsed more violently now, sending shockwaves through the tomb, cracking the stone beneath their feet. She had only moments before the tomb collapsed entirely, and the abyss would be free. You have to destroy it, Corin shouted again, his voice strained with desperation. It is the only way. Celine's mind raced. Destroy the core? But could she? Could any of them? She looked around at her companions. Leora, Kaelin, Corin, each of them struggling to hold their ground. They had all sacrificed so much already. Could she ask them to sacrifice more? To destroy the last chance they had to heal the world? The answer was clear. There was no choice. She gripped her sword tightly, feeling its magic respond to her will. I can't do it alone, she whispered to herself. But together, the abyss roared in fury as Celine surged forward, her sword raised high, shining with light that cut through the darkness. The abyss howled, but was too late. The sword plunged into the core with a deafening crack. For a moment, everything was still. Time seemed to stretch, the air thick with the power of the abyss. The tomb itself groaned, as if it were screaming in agony. And then in an instant, the world was filled with light. A blinding, overwhelming force that shattered the tomb, split the sea, and sent a shockwave through the very fabric of reality. Chapter 10, The Descent. The moment the abyssal core shattered, the world seemed to tear open. The light was blinding, a scorching white fire that filled every corner of the tomb and stretched beyond, into the very heart of the ocean. The tendrils of darkness that had once wriggled and writhed through the chamber disintegrated in the wake of the explosion, turning to ash in the searing glow. The air felt thick with power, as if the fabric of reality itself had been twisted and snapped in two. But in the midst of the chaos, Celine could feel it. A pulse, a tremor in the fabric of the world that reverberated through her bones. It was as though something was calling her, pulling her down, deeper, far below. The abyss was not gone. It was wounded, perhaps, but not defeated. It had left its mark on her. Celine! Leora's voice broke through the haze, sharp and urgent. We need to get out of here. Now! Celine blinked rapidly, her mind still struggling to clear the fog of the abyss's influence. The sword still hummed in her hand, its power still resonating with the broken core. She glanced around. Kaelin was already helping Corin to his feet, the Tideborn's face pale but resolute. The tomb was collapsing around them. Stones cracked, and the walls trembled as though the very foundations of the world were shaking. But it wasn't just a tomb. The rift had begun to open again, larger, more violent this time. It was as if the destruction of the core had given birth to something worse. A dark, jagged tear in the space between worlds had formed above them, a swirling vortex of black and red that consumed everything in its path. The sound of it was deafening, a deafening screech, like the very heavens were tearing apart. "We can't escape it. It's pulling us in," Kalen shouted, trying to steady Corin as the old Tide-born staggered. The rift was growing, and with it, so was the energy. The abyss was rising again, but this time it wasn't alone. "Celine, we have to go," Leora urged, her voice tight with panic. "We can't survive this." But Celine, her mind clearing slowly, could feel it. The pull of the rift. The abyss was already working its way back into the world. And if they left now, they risked being trapped in its grip forever. The tomb, the core, the abyss itself. It was only the beginning. They needed to stop the rift, or this destruction would never end. "No," Celine said through gritted teeth, pushing herself to her feet. "We cannot leave. We have to stop it before it consumes everything." "You can't," Corin gasped, his voice strained. "It's too late. The rift is already too powerful, even if you try to close it." "I don't have a choice," she snapped, her gaze focused on the swirling vortex above them. "We don't have a choice. The abyss wants to return, to reshape the world. But we're not going to let it." For a moment, the others were silent, their faces drawn with exhaustion, fear, and doubt. They had all been through so much: battles, betrayals, the shattering of their world. And yet, they stood at the edge of the greatest threat yet. But Celine had no more time for hesitation. She knew what had to be done. The rift had to be sealed, no matter the cost. "Help me," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but it rang out with determination that resonated in the hearts of those around her. Leora nodded, gripping her sword with renewed strength. "I'm with you." Kalen, his usual stoic composure slipping, gave a grim nod. "We stand together, then." Corin, though shaken, did not hesitate. He stepped forward, his staff glowing with the faint, ancient magic of the Tideborn. "Together, we can fight the tide of the abyss. But be warned, once we descend, there is no turning back." The ground trembled beneath their feet again. They had no time to argue. Celine clenched her fist around her sword, its blade now flickering with light that cut through the encroaching darkness. They needed to descend, to go deeper, to find the source of the rift and sever its connection to the abyss. The tomb was collapsing rapidly, the walls falling away into the sea, but the rift, hovering above them, remained steady, growing larger with each passing second. "We descend, then," Celine said, stepping toward the heart of the crumbling tomb. The group followed her, their eyes set on the rift. But as they made their way deeper into the ruins, a strange sensation began to wash over them, an eerie calmness that contrasted sharply with the chaos above. The deeper they went, the more the tomb seemed to pulse with life. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, breathing in time with the rift. And then they reached it, a vast chasm in the heart of the tomb, a cavernous abyss beneath the waves, stretching far deeper than the eye could see. It was here that the tomb's true purpose was revealed, a place built not just to hold the abyss, but to serve as its conduit. Before them lay a massive, ancient structure, an altar made of black stone, inscribed with runes that pulsed faintly with malevolent energy. The rift hovered just above the altar, its dark tendrils reaching toward the sky, distorting the space around it. But what struck Celine was not the rift. It was a figure standing at its center. It was Riven. He stood in the heart of the altar, his eyes glowing with the same dark power that had once consumed him. His form was no longer entirely human. His body seemed to flicker in and out of existence, a twisting blur of shadow and light. "You came?" Riven's voice echoed, distant and hollow, as if he were speaking to the very fabric of reality itself. "I knew you would. The abyss calls, and you can never resist it, can you, Celine?" Celine's heart raced as she stepped forward, her sword raised. "Riven, you don't have to do this. We can still stop it." He chuckled, a hollow, chilling sound that sent a shiver down her spine. You think I want to stop it? No, Celine. The abyss was always meant to return. It is the beginning of everything and the end of everything. There is no victory for you, no saving this world. You can fight it, but you will lose. His form flickered again, and suddenly, the rift surged with a terrible force. Celine's feet slid beneath her as the very air seemed to warp and bend around them. The rift expanded, becoming a spiraling vortex of pure chaos, and the sky above them twisted, filled with impossible constellations. No, Celine thought, her grip on her sword tightening. This is not the end. Riven, she said again, her voice shaking with a mixture of sadness and fury. You've become a part of it, haven't you? You've let the abyss consume you. Riven's eyes narrowed, his smile cruel and distant. No, Celine, I have embraced it, and soon you will too. With a flick of his wrist, the rift pulsed, and a torrent of energy lashed out, sending the group stumbling back. The very foundations of the tomb began to crack, the ocean above beginning to spill through the cracks, as though the entire world was about to be consumed. We have no time, Corin gasped. If we don't seal the rift now, we'll be lost forever. Celine's resolve hardened. There was no choice left. She had to end this. The abyss had to be sealed, and Riven had to be stopped. With a cry of defiance, Celine plunged forward, the blade of her sword cutting through the air with a blaze of light. They were going to face the abyss, and they would not let it win. Chapter 11, The Final Convergence. The rift loomed above them like a jagged wound in the fabric of reality itself, twisting the very air with its impossible force. Every second that passed, the rift grew wider, its tendrils of darkness creeping outward, seeping into the material plane like ink spreading across water. The altar beneath Riven pulsed with the same malevolent rhythm, a heart beating in time with the chaos of the rift. And in the center of it all, Riven stood, his form flickering in and out of existence, as if he were not quite part of this world anymore. Celine's heart pounded in her chest as she approached, every step heavier than the last. The others were at her back, Leora, Kaelin, Corin, all of them preparing for the final confrontation, knowing that their world hung in the balance. The ground beneath their feet trembled with each pulse of the rift, and the very air felt charged with dark energy. The abyss had been waiting for this moment. It knew that only by breaking through could it remake the world in its image. But Celine wouldn't let it. We can still stop this, Riven, she called out, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. You don't have to do this. This isn't you. The abyss is not the answer. Riven's eyes, glowing with an unnatural light, flickered as he looked at her. His smile was empty, twisted. No, Celine, it never was about me. This isn't my choice anymore. This is the world's destiny. He spread his arms wide, as if offering himself up to the swirling vortex of the rift. You can't stop it. You can't stop us. The abyss is beyond you, beyond all of us. As he spoke, the rift surged once more, its tendrils reaching down toward them like a hungry beast. The wind picked up, howling to the cavern, and the air was thick with the scent of salt and ozone. The sky above them, now fractured and scarred, was an unnatural hue, streaked with violent purples and reds. It was as though reality itself were being torn apart, and Celine could feel it in every fiber of her being. The rift was feeding on their world, growing stronger with every moment that passed. She could feel the pull, the urge given to let the rift take her, to use its power to bend reality itself to her will. It was intoxicating, almost irresistible. But as she stood on the edge of that precipice, she found her strength. No, we may be at the edge of the world, Riven, she said, her voice cutting to the chaos like a blade. But we still have the power to change it. You've been consumed by the abyss, but I'm not going to let it consume everything. There was a flicker of hesitation in Riven's eyes, something fleeting that reminded Celine of the man he once was, the man she had known, the man who had stood by her side. But it was gone almost as quickly as it had come, swallowed by the darkness. You still don't understand, do you? He spat. The world you're trying to save doesn't exist anymore. The old order is gone, Celine, and when the rift fully opens, there won't be any old world to save. There will be nothing but chaos. Then let's create something new. Celine's voice was firm now, filled with conviction that could not be shaken. We've all been through too much to let it end this way. With a final, desperate cry, she charged toward the altar, her sword blazing with a light that could pierce even the deepest shadows. The others followed, their weapons drawn, their determination unwavering. But Riven was ready. With a wave of his hand, the rift surged, sending a shockwave of darkness rippling outward. The force was so powerful that Celine was knocked off her feet, thrown back into the rocky walls of the cavern. Her breath was knocked out of her, and for a moment, the world spun around her. She tried to stand, but the energy of the rift held her down, binding her to the floor as if it were a living thing. "No," she whispered, struggling against the pressure. "We're not giving up. Not now." Leora, Kalen, and Korn were with her in an instant, pulling her to her feet. "We fight together," Leora said, her voice fierce. "We can still do this." Celine nodded, and together they made their way toward Riven, who stood at the center of the altar, his arms raised high in defiance. The rift's tendrils lashed out at them, but they pushed forward, their strength fueled by the bond they shared and their refusal to let the world fall. At the heart of the rift, Celine could feel something shifting. The very essence of reality was warping. Time itself was slipping away, tearing at the seams of the world. The abyss had already begun to spread, infecting everything. If they didn't act quickly, the rift would swallow them all whole. "Riven!" Celine shouted, her voice breaking through the roar of the rift. "You can't control this. You don't have the power you think you do. The abyss isn't meant to be controlled. No one can wield it without being consumed." Riven's laugh echoed through the cavern, hollow and cold. "You misunderstand, Celine. I've already accepted the abyss. I am the abyss now. There's no turning back." With a scream, Riven thrust his hands toward the rift, and a wave of darkness surged from it, engulfing the chamber. The force of it was like a tidal wave, crashing over them. It felt as if the world itself were buckling, folding in on itself. But Celine, with the last of her strength, lifted her sword high. "We will not let it end this way." As her blade rose, a brilliant light flared from it, pure and radiant, cutting through the darkness. It was the last of the magic that had once been, the last flicker of power before it was lost forever. The light from her sword met the darkness head-on, and for a moment, the two forces clashed in an explosion of light and shadow, a battle between creation and destruction. The rift trembled. For the briefest of moments, Celine could see everything, every possibility. The world torn apart, the abyss victorious, the old world reborn in chaos. But she could also see another possibility, one where the rift was sealed, where the world was saved, where hope still lived. Her heart swelled with that hope, and with all her strength, she thrust her sword into the center of a rift. The world screamed. A deafening crack split the air, and in that moment, everything stopped. The rift began to collapse. The darkness that had once consumed the cavern turned to light, a brilliant, blinding flash that filled the world. The sky above shifted, the fractured stars realigning, the world itself beginning to heal. The echoes of the abyss faded, slipping back into the void from which they had come. But it wasn't over. Celine's sword fell to the ground with a heavy thud. Her vision swam, and her knees buckled beneath her. She had no strength left. Her body was spent. She had given everything to stop the rift. Around her, the others were likewise crumpling, their faces pale, their bodies bruised. They had all felt the weight of the abyss, the terrible pull of its power, but they had resisted. They had saved their world. And yet, as Celine lay on the ground, her thoughts began to drift. The rift had been sealed, but the damage was done. The old world was gone, and the future was uncertain. What would become of their fractured world now? The answer was unclear. But one thing was certain, they had a chance. And for the first time in a long while, Celine felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Chapter 12, A World Remade. The rift had closed, but its echo remained. The air was still, almost unnervingly so. The light that had once flooded the cavern slowly faded, leaving behind only the remnants of the battle, of the destruction and the victory they had claimed. Celine lay on the ground, her body weak and her mind clouded, but the weight of the decision she had made, the choice that had cost so much, was still heavy on her heart. She had sealed the rift. She had fought back the abyss. But as she slowly regained consciousness, something was different. The world felt altered. Around her, the landscape of the abyssal tomb was changing. The stones beneath her fingers were warm, the once cold blackened walls now glowing with a faint light. The air, which had been thick with the oppressive presence of the rift, was clearer now, more breathable. The sky above them was no longer broken and torn, but filled with a soft, golden hue, as though the very heavens themselves were healing. Leora was the first to rise. She helped Celine to her feet, her face tired but resolute. "You did it, Celine," Leora said softly, her voice filled with admiration and relief. "We stopped the rift." Celine nodded, her throat dry. "But at what cost?" The others gathered around her, Kalen, Corin, even Riven, whose form was now crumpled and broken. He lay on the ground, his eyes hollow, his power drained. The abyss had taken him to the brink of destruction, and now it seemed to have abandoned him. Riven's voice came as a rasp, weak and distant. You closed it. You sealed the rift, but it's not enough. The world is changed now, Celine. The abyss is gone, but what remains is not the same." Celine's eyes met his, and for the first time, she saw the fear in his gaze. Not the arrogance, not the madness. It was fear of what the world had become in the wake of the rift's closing. She could feel it too. The world had been fractured, torn apart by the destruction of the void and the collapse of the abyss. There was no magic left, and the very structure of reality had been strained to its limits. The peace they had fought so hard to restore felt fragile, fleeting, like a dream on the edge of waking. Corin stepped forward, his hand pressed against the stone of the altar. "We may have stopped the rift, but the balance has shifted. The fabric of reality itself has been torn. The world may be healing, but it will never be the same. The absence of magic, it's permanent." Kalen's brow furrowed. "Then what now? We've sealed the rift. We've defeated Riven and his madness. What does that leave us with? A world without the magic that shaped everything we knew. A world without the void," Celine said quietly, her voice heavy with the weight of her own thoughts. She looked out toward the horizon, toward the broken remnants of their world, scattered like pieces of an old dream. A world that has to learn how to live without the chaos, without the power that once ruled everything. Leora moved beside her, a quiet understanding in her eyes. "You're asking if we can rebuild, if we can create something new from the ashes. The world might be broken, but it doesn't mean we can't start over." "Start over," Celine whispered, as though the words tasted strange on her tongue. "How do we even begin?" Her thoughts drifted back to the destruction that had brought them to this point. The void's collapse, the war, the rebellion, the choices that had led them here. There had been so much loss. And now, with everything shattered, there was only uncertainty. But as she stood there, watching the first rays of the sun break through the fractured sky, something within her began to stir. She had not fought to end the world. She had fought to save it, to give it another chance. And perhaps that was the answer. Another chance. "Perhaps we begin by accepting that the world we knew is gone," she said, her voice steady with the realization. "And that's okay. It means we have a chance to build something new, something different. The past is over, but the future is still in our hands." Kalen shook his head slightly, though not with cynicism. "It's not that simple. We can't just erase what came before. There's so much we have to rebuild. Magic, politics, alliances, the very fabric of society. It all has to be rewritten, and it's going to take time." "I know," Celine said, her gaze unwavering. "It's not going to be easy, but we don't have to do it alone." Corin spoke up, his voice still weak, but gaining strength. "The tide born may have been driven by ancient desires for power, but we too have learned much. We know the ocean's depths, its rhythms, and its chaos. Perhaps we can teach the world something new about balance. It's not magic, but it could be a way forward." Leora placed a hand on Celine's shoulder. "And the rebellion? There are still those who fought with us, who believe in the cause. We've lost so much, but we still have each other. We will rebuild together." A silence fell over them, a shared understanding among the group. The battle was over, but their journey had just begun. "Riven," Celine said, looking down at the broken figure lying on the ground. What will you do now? You've lost everything you fought for. What's left for you? Riven's gaze met hers, but his eyes were empty, hollow. I don't know. The abyss consumed me, and now there's nothing but emptiness. I've seen the truth. There's no going back for me. Celine studied him for a long moment. Maybe not, but that doesn't mean you're beyond redemption. You lost everything. Yes, but that doesn't mean you can't choose something different now. Riven said nothing, only staring into the distance, his face a mask of regret and lost purpose. Celine didn't know if he could ever change, but in that moment, she realized that everyone had a choice, even those who had fallen farthest. The future was uncertain, but it was still theirs to shape. Let's go, Celine said, her voice carrying the weight of finality. We have a world to rebuild. And so, together, they left the ruins of the abyssal tomb behind. The world was in pieces, but it was still alive. And for the first time in a long time, Celine believed that they might just have the strength to forge something better from the ashes of the old. The journey ahead would be long, but there was hope, real hope, for a new world. The scars of the past would never truly fade. But perhaps, in the end, it was the lessons of the old world that would guide them towards something better, something lasting. For now, the future was unwritten, and it was up to them to decide what came next.